Welcome, I'm Bill Wake. This is my summary of the work we've done on Twitch this week. We're working on a set of tools for dulcimer players, and our focus this week is a chord chart for mountain dulcimer players. This past week we drew the fretboard, spaced correctly with frets in multiple styles. We have a chord chart that knows major, minor, diminished, and seventh chords. We distinguish note name, the fretboard tuning, the fretboard, and the fret. And given a fretboard, we can tell which chords are possible. So here's my crash course on chords. The first picture is a plain piano keyboard, a couple octaves, no notes selected. And then the second picture to the right is the C chord. And the three red dots show the notes of the C chord, C, E, G. And the N plus 4, N plus 7 is the counts. So if you start on the first dot and you go up to the black key, down to the white, up to the black, down to the white, that takes you 4 steps. And if you go from there, it's 3 more, so it's 7. So that pattern, start on a note, go up 4, go up 7. That gives you the shape of every major chord. Doesn't matter whether you start white or black, as long as you count both white and black keys. All right, now a minor chord, the middle note is flattened. It's 1 step lower. So the pattern is N plus 3 and 7 instead of N plus 4. And then the various other chords have different patterns to them. And our job is to encode those patterns and work out where they are on the fretboard. All right, let's take a demo and take a code walkthrough. The chord chart mountain dulcimer. And here we have a picture. This is the first half or so of a fretboard. And you can see that some spaces are wide and some are narrow, and some have different shape or, different line widths or dotted or not. And each of those is significant to us. So we have wide and narrow spaces because that's the way dulcimers are laid out. Their original form was much like the white keys on piano with no sharps or flats. A little variant of being in a mode, but I won't go into that. But anyway, the old dulcimers didn't have this 1 plus or 6 plus, and so they had wide, wide, narrow, wide, wide, wide. Well, wide, wide, narrow, wide. Okay, that's the modal bit. But we've added a couple frets over time. So the 6.5 came first, and that filled in this spot, and then the 1.5 gives you a couple more notes you don't normally have. So there are variations on dulcimers. We're going to be able to support 4 different kinds. One is just the plain board without the 1.5 and 6.5. Another one with a 6.5. And then another one with 6.5, 1.5, and then one that has everything. So a chromatic dulcimer that is kind of like a piano that has all the white and black notes. All right, and then the width variations mean something too. The first one is the nut, fret 0, and it's drawn a little wider and it sticks out a little bit. Fret 1, 2, 3, those are regular frets. They've got a simple line. 1.5 is an added one, so we gave it a dotted or dashed line. And then 7 is the octave, so I gave it a little bit thicker line. So a dulcimer player that looked at this would pretty much know what you're talking about and where it goes. All right, then we worked out what are the chords and which chords can you play on a dulcimer that has this fretboard. So D major is D, F sharp, and A, and you can get that in several ways. The easiest is the open string on the bass, the open string on the middle, and then hold down fret 2 on the melody string closest to you. And, you've got it. And then a D7th, D, F sharp, A, we're leaving out, and C. Again, those notes exist on the fretboard, so you can play that chord. Let's go down further. I'll go down to where it says G major, about 2/3 down. G major, G7th. There's no G minor, there's no G diminished or any of that stuff. You can only do a few things with G because you're missing some of the notes. So G minor needs a B flat. We don't have a B flat on this board. Okay. You can get it by tuning your dulcimer to a different key, different starting notes, but then you're missing other notes instead. So it's always kind of a compromise. Or my friend calls it, thinking like Sudoku, trying to fit things in where they go. All right, but what we have done is we picked D major to start with. If you have a little music background, you probably think you start at C, but I picked D because we're assuming a DAD tuning will allow that to change, but for now it's DAD. So the lowest note on the bass string is D, and the most natural chords will start there. So we start wherever the lowest note is, and we only take chords that can legitimately play. All right, well, it took a bit to get there. Let's look at code. So here's chord chart view is the top level view, and it's a scroll view with the fretboard on top and then a bunch of chords, chord names on the bottom. And you get the chord names by walking through every possible note, starting on that bass note, every possible note chromatically, whether or not, like if there's a B flat, we look for a B flat, but it's not on the fretboard, doesn't matter, we won't show it. So every possible note, and then we say, what are all the chord qualities? Well, chord qualities are major, minor, diminished, seventh, and so on. So the ones we're looking for, we walk through for every note, for every chord quality, and if the chord chart has those notes or has that chord, we put its description in there. So the note name and the quality. So G major, G minor, and so on. Yeah, so the work is in chart.has chords. Right, and chart knows the fretboard and it knows the tuning, so it has the information it needs to do that. All right, let's look at the fretboard first. So this is the model side of it, and I've got the diatonic 1/6 fretboard because it has the 1.5 and 6.5. Again, we'll do more later, but we basically just define it. You know, if the first number there is the position, if it were chromatic, what would the fret number be? 0, and then it was a wide space, so it skips 1 and it goes to 2, 3, 4, 5, skips 6, goes to 7, skips 8, goes to 9. You know, that reflects that wide, narrow variation. And then the middle column is the name, so the 1+, or also called 1.5. And then the last column is what kind of fret is this, and we mostly use that for drawing. But it tells us which ones are half frets, so they get the dashed line, and regular frets get the regular line, and so on. Okay, so a fretboard knows those frets. It's kind of the big thing it knows. It knows the size of the fretboard, which is not how many frets are there, but how many frets would there be if it were chromatic. Okay, so the number we're looking for to get the size is we want the highest number here, 17, and then we also have 0, so we add 1 to that. Okay, so it's just finding that maximum. And you know, the fact that there are missing frets, this is really more to figure out the width and the length and so on. All right, then we can answer the question, what are all the notes on this string? And it produces a set. It basically walks through the fretboard and takes your starting note and then adds how many positions the fret index tells you. So how many chromatic steps are we from here? And that'll give us the answer. So our note name has this plus operation, so it can increment. All right, then all notes. Well, we're going to walk through the whole tuning. So we get all the notes from the tuning, map them in according to all notes for the string, and then we do a reduce because each one produces a set. We can add all those sets with the empty set, and the union of that is all the notes on all the strings. So we're not distinguishing which octave, so it's you know, it could be that the same one string has a C and another string has a C, and that's perfectly fine. We'll only report one because it's a set. Okay, then the frets themselves, there's not much to them. They just know their type. It's really a little data bag. The index, the name, and the type. Something might migrate there, but nothing for now. Okay, then the tuning, and again, this is pretty simple. Normally it's just for a 3-string dulcimer, it's 3 notes. DAD is a very common tuning. DAA is another. EBG is another. DF sharp A is another. There are a couple or a few dozen tunings that get used. Most people stick to DAD most of the time, but some people go all over the place. All right, and all we've done so far is we just map those notes coming in. So DAD as a string, we uppercase them and map them into individual notes. It needs to be a little more sophisticated because we don't handle DF sharp A or C, F, B flat, or other kind of variations, but we will, and that'll pick that up. And then we also have the start note. It's really just the first note on the bass string. I feel like we probably ought to pull out names. You should probably be able to ask the tuning, what's the bass note, what's the middle string note, and what's the melody note. But again, it hasn't emerged yet. All right, then the drawing, we are basically the fretboard view knows the fretboard, and so the fret style maps into a bunch of different stroke styles. So the nut, that first fret on the left, the 0, we gave it a fat line width, and we told it to put a little extra square end on the line. All right, the regular one is just a simple 1 pixel line. The half is dashed, and then the octave is a little bit thicker. All right, and the pieces of doing it is, let's go down here, we're doing it in a canvas, which lets us kind of mix sizes and views, pre-existing views and paths, shapes. All right, and it's just 3 things going on. We draw the strings first, then we draw the frets. So the strings are horizontal, the frets are vertical, and then we draw the fret names on the top. And let's look at each of those. All right, so strings, the bulk of the work is in string shape, but string shape gives us a path, and we come back and we stroke that with the line width we want to use. So let's peek over at string shape. This path has 3 parts, 1 for each string. So we start on the top left, and we go to the top right, and then we have a new line, or a new part of the path. We move back to the far left, but the middle, and draw to the far right and the middle, and then we move back to the far left and the maximum Y, which is on the bottom, and draw over to the maximum X and maximum Y. So it's just those 3 lines. We don't worry about whatever size we're given is what we draw it in that rectangle. All right, and then the frets. So the big thing there is we need to figure out the kind of default distance, and that's where that fretboard size comes in. So we want to make it that each fret that gets drawn uses that width to tell how far apart to do them. Now, in real life, the physics of a mountain dulcimer is that it's more like this 12th root of 2, because you're taking an octave is double the pitch, and the 12th root of 2 tells you more like how far apart things should be, but they vary as they get higher. They vary. So if you look at a guitar or a dulcimer, the lower frets are very far apart, and then as they get closer and closer, they get closer and closer as you get higher up. We're not reflecting that. We're just doing a very linear picture. Most people won't have any trouble with that. All right, and so the calculation is we'll put the X coordinate is going to be based on that fret distance and the index that we have in our list. So if this index says you are the 5th fret at slot 10, your name is 5, but you're at slot 10, say, or 12 or whatever it is, 12 times the fret distance. And then we just make a little path that's the vertical line for the fret from that X position from the bottom to the top, and stroke that path. Okay, and you see the fret style here. So if it's the nut, it's one way, but we use the stroke that we defined up above. All right, and then finally we have the symbol names, and you can see the fret dot name is the core of that. Again, we figure out based on the index and the width and the fret size, with a little bit of offset to account for centering and so on. So that gets us those numbers, and that takes care of the fretboard view. All right, and then more on the domain side, the chord chart. Okay, so we have an enum for chord quality, major, dominant, 7th minor, minor, 7th diminished, and we can tell what their name is, and they each define that pattern. And here you see that 047, 037, 036, and so on. So that tells us, how do you find this chord type? So given a starting note, apply that pattern. Okay, and then chord chart knows the tuning, and it knows the fretboard, and it puts them together. So if you want to find out if you have a chord of a given chord name and of a given chord quality, you walk through and you walk through the pattern, and you make sure that every note in the pattern is in the list of all notes. Okay, that's not a perfect definition because you might have a note that appears, well, you might have two notes that appear on the same string but don't appear on other strings. And so even though you have all the notes on the dulcimer, you don't have a way to play them all at the same time. So this is, again, a kind of an approximation. I think this is really going to go away. We'll have something, hopefully next week, to identify what are the possible chords. So, you know, what frets do you press to get a given chord? And then if a chord's not feasible because there aren't the needed notes available across all strings, you know, with a specific string in mind, then we won't have to worry about that. So I think has chords is going to be more like, is your list of chord frettings, does it include this chord? And if there aren't any frettings for it, then it won't show up in the list, and has chords will say the list is empty and no, it doesn't have it. It's a little bit of an approximation. Coming up next week, we're going to start identifying chords based on one note per string, so that more detailed view of things. We're going to identify which chords you can actually reach. So it does me no good to say, oh, the notes are there. You just have to hold down the 1st fret, the 8th fret, and the 15th fret. My hand's not that big. I'm pretty sure yours aren't either. It's got to be something we can reach. All right, and then finally, we're going to add the ability to choose the fretboard, one of the 4 variations I mentioned. And the tuning, I think I'm just going to define the 20, 30 variations we know and default it to the most common one. At some point, we might let you put in a custom tuning, but I think realistically, if I get the right 10 or 15, that's 95% of what, 99.5% of what anybody wants. So you can join us Monday through Thursday, 2 to 4:30 Eastern Time, or 7 to 9:30 p.m. UTC. xp123.com/Twitch takes you to the live site, and xp123.com/YouTube takes you to the old sessions, time delayed a couple weeks and lightly edited. Thanks for watching. Hope you can join us sometime. Bye-bye.